Hello there, welcome back to another video. This one you're probably thinking, what is he? He's really going that low? He's actually going to cover Battle Los Angeles. Why is he doing that? This is insane. This is, even for someone who's covered the core, this one feels low. You know. And yes, I covered the core, another Aaron Eckhart film. But the reason I'm covering Battle Los Angeles is not particularly for the film itself. Although the film is enjoyable trash. I mean, it's ridiculously written. I mean, the writing is terrible in this film. There's not one moment it's not a cliche. You know, the acting's fairly horrible throughout. I mean, Aaron Eckhart does his best, but he's got a very basic character. And anyone else you recognise in the film, they're all just trying to get through it. It's not a film for anyone to show their acting chops. Really. I mean, the best thing about the film is probably the direction is solid. Taking the idea and then taking stuff from other better films like Saving Private Ryan or, Black Hawk Down, and just taking their aesthetics and putting it in here. And doing a shaky cam thing pretty well, so it's not intrusive, so you can see what's going on. So you only really use it when they can't see what's going on, then it tells you. And then when they start getting an idea of how to fight, it gets a lot more steady. So the direction's competent. I mean, that's the thing that keeps it going, because there's not that much plot or character development there. It's just like, you're in this development. There's an alien invasion, you're with these soldiers, trying to get through basically one day. In the fight. So it's basically Starship Troopers, but set in Earth. Without the satire, without the sense of humour, without the style, without the intelligence, without anything really. And even without the campy acting. So that's what you've got in this film. But the thing is, it's one of the most amazingly right-wing films I've seen. The most obvious right-wing films in an industry that's probably more right-wing than they let on. Because the big thing about Hollywood you get a lot is how left-wing it is. And I'm not quite convinced, because I lean particularly leftwards, and I'm not quite sure that it represents anyone who leans leftwards. I really don't. I think it's very constrained to making it look as if it is, but I don't think it's actually the case. Because the one thing I can't help but notice is, right, Hollywood started off as a very right-wing leaning industry, even though it's an artistic industry, right? So the artistic industry tends to go more left-wing leaning. It just does. It's just like most people who are artists lean towards the left, lean towards progress, artistry, and making and basically being for the people and not for big studio industries. But they go to these big studios to get the money, so there's a compromise. But always the studios have the money, and in the basically start. I mean, early on, it was the little man like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and stuff like that that got all the money because they were in the 20s, 10s and 20s. It's about a little man sticking to the system and going into depression. Times were tough, so that kind of little man narrative getting fed to the people helped the capitalist system survive. But they also had a lot of films which were about, middle class people and their problems with musicals and things like that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. But the kind of the right wing stuff, you could go towards the Western. That was very much individualism and being tough, or gangster films, very right wing tough guys. But even in gangster films, it was always like, there was this narrative of crime doesn't pay, which is a very right-leaning thing, even though most of them are criminals. Right-wing people have a lot of criminals. And a lot of the gangsters are pretty much right-wing because it's the philosophy of individualism. So, they have this thing, this kind of thing in the 20s and 30s and 40s of individualism at a cost, but it was actually promoted by very much right-leaning studio systems who had all the money and who wanted to make a profit and wanted to keep as much power as possible and were very anti-union. And that's the point. Hollywood hasn't changed much. It's all about how do you keep the money in your coffers and not in someone else's coffers. That's what you hear all the time in any communication with Hollywood ever. That's what they're about. They're about the money. And it's like, how can an industry that's so obsessed with that, and it has to be because these are big budget spectacles a lot of the time. I mean, you have to get people out of their homes to go and see a film. It's a lot easier in the olden era where there was no TV and people would just go there and see these different narratives. And you could have a mix of right-wing stuff and left-wing stuff, even though the right-wing were kind of running the show, were very anti-communist, and even if someone had like socialist leanings, until the witch hunt, it was like, leave that at home, we don't care. So there was that. But it's kind of moved on from that. Now everything in Hollywood tends to be, it's all about trying to get the people involved, getting people into watch a show or watch your film or play a video game. And the thing that tends to become obvious is as things get tougher over time, the narratives go towards violence, which is a much more right-wing than left-wing solution to things, traditionally. I mean, left-wing tends to have to be pushed a lot before they go to violence, and then it goes to pure revolution, but it tends to not be the ideal. The way a right-wing narrative tends towards individualism, have their guns, have their might, So, that's becoming more prevalent. Even now, you look at strong women narratives, it's all about giving them guns, rather than, like, what's more difficult than raising a family or raising a child? It doesn't mean that's all women can be, because women can do all lots of stuff now, but actually being good at guns tends to be or being good fighters tends to be the big narrative thing in a lot of entertainment now, and that's weird. You can't help but think, is that a bit right-wing? Aren't you pushing kind of right-wing narratives? Because, I mean, you probably noticed the romantic comedies died. I mean, no one can do it properly to start with, but that used to be a good avenue of women. You can actually talk about women's issues in society. It's dead. You get very basic stuff on, like, TV shows, but no one ever watches them because they're all sappy. Instead, it's like, a strong woman isn't into that soppy stuff. It has to be like in fighting or Marvel stuff or being a good supporting character in an action movie or guy, and it's like, this is as retro and western like as possible. How are they strong? How does that count as a strong leader or a strong person? How does relying on a gun for guys count as strength beyond someone is insecure about their strength? Really, it's just weird. And we're getting more and more into this. But Hollywood doesn't seem to like to admit it. That's where they're getting their money from mostly nowadays. It's mostly right-wing narratives of might means right, fighting people. You've had the Rambo films for years. You've had pretty much since the 70s onwards, the big movies each year. You get an odd comedy, but usually a lot of it is an action movie. Big action movie, big action movie, big action movie. Even in the 60s you had the war movies. In the 50s the westerns. Something that's always there, that's paying for the more liberal small films that no one goes to watch. Or maybe you can make it an odd one people go and watch, and it wins an Oscar and then everyone forgets about it again. It just feels like an industry that's very wary of its own product, very insecure of its own product. and it's finding ways to lie to itself about what its product actually is, which is, right wing narratives about crushing your enemy completely, constantly. And that's why this jumped out at me, because this film, Battle Los Angeles, is so right wing. It's so narrative based on. The narrative is, oh, we're going to invade you, so we must fight back. But there's no nuance, no character, no nothing about that. It's just like, you're going to have a typical white guy leader, a bunch of minorities as his sidekicks who are going to do the fight. So implicitly, all the different minorities are all right wing as well because they're in the army, which a lot of minorities are, by the way, because they come from conservative, societies, and that's the way they'll go, and that's where a lot of the world actually is, and that's who Hollywood has to cater to. So they have this progressive ideology that they put out, but they're having to serve a lot of nations that actually have a much more regressive ideology from their opinion. And you're going to have to keep on having these violent narratives, these hero worship narratives that are might means right, and either a woman is either a mother or she's strong with a gun or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like, it's weird. It's weird how everything's kind of gone that direction. It's like, you think of many good women parts recently that in movies. Really, you get an odd indie movie. I mean, that's where the parts are nowadays, the indie movies that are with 10 people who I've ever seen because the audience isn't there. It's the kind of stuff I'd watch, but most people wouldn't watch it. And it's just like, this narrative is just going really weird. And it's always changing slightly. We're trying to change the makeup of what you see of this kind of narrative. But it's always coming back to, like, we need this strong base of these action movies. We need this kind of right-wing narrative as our base, as our financial base to do these other films, say we're not that way, even though we are. And it becomes this weird regressive thing that actually goes on for it, because everyone has to be a cliche at this point. Like, really, how many gay characters in a modern blockbuster are even remotely interesting or remotely defined by anything other than their sexuality? Really. Or any woman, is she going to be stay-at-home mum? Is she going to be a gun-toting lunatic? Or what? Or an odd romantic comedy lead, or a bit of simp, rather than a normal person. Like, most women in films nowadays aren't defined as normal people. Most guys aren't either. But most women especially. I mean, they say all things are getting better. Really? Where? Especially these big blockbusters, they don't seem to be getting better. I mean, they really don't. They just seem to be these cliches and more cliches and more cliches. It's really bad. So, it just feels like an industry that's very delusional where its money's coming from, and seems to be yelling out about all these injustices going on in the world when they've had their own multiple scandals. They are financed by these big corporations that don't care about any of this stuff unless it's a headline. And it just seems like an insane industry that's actually just getting more and more corrupted by lying to itself, and it's become this industry that's just putting its junk out, doesn't believe what's putting out, and you're actually watching decades now of just films that no one quite believes, really. It's just things that are there, and we're trying to appeal to these people that we don't like, and we can't go into anything, we can't think about anything, so we'll make these vague narratives that don't add up for anybody watching them. And it just becomes this sick industry that has to either move to some other direction where, how do you get your money? You get it through low budget films, or admitting you're making right wing propaganda, because most of the narratives are might means right, and stop being so simpy about it, and stop being like, oh, we'll have a couple of emotional scenes that don't make sense. we'll give this character depth by giving him a gun and making him really moody. We'll give this guy depth by saying he's a wimp and now he's a hero. None of this really feels like very satisfying. It was just watching this film just brought it home to me. It was like, oh my god, this is the ideal Hollywood film. Like, narrative wise, this is what they want to put out. But they want to add other stuff usually to hide it. But no, this one they didn't even bother hiding it. But it's like, yeah, every film kind of has all these narrative beats. Done a bit better, but it's still this flagrant. Will make you feel wall-like about other people, make you feel like you judge other people. You know, it's still a kind of very right-wing society around the world and a very conservative society, and films are really aiming for that, and you need to be a bit more honest about yourself, what you're doing to yourself, and then actually having narratives actually work better. So you can actually be a bit more questionable about what you're doing. But most films aren't. Most films are just basic. I mean, look at Batman. I adore Batman. I adore a lot of these films that I'm criticising. I have a lot of fun with a lot of them. But it doesn't mean I don't think, yeah, this is a bit dodgy in this places. You know, and Batman's the ultimate right-wing thing, isn't it? He's basically a rich guy beating up poor people. That's what he's doing. And we all love it. You know, Superman is basically a guy who can beat up anybody. It's these power fantasies we've got. We love the power fantasies. I mean, society loves these power fantasies. And we haven't evolved through it. But if you've seen you're doing art, you're just taking money from big corporations, you're not really doing art, you're doing propaganda. And just be honest about it, because you're not doing anybody any favours, you're not saying anything, not presenting any complexity, you're just doing propaganda and trying to hide it slightly. So I'm not sure if this video made that much sense, but it's just something I've been feeling for a while watching these films. It's like, yeah, there is an undertow that I don't think is very healthy, a certain lack of self-inspection. And also I think a lot of people in the industry are more right-wing than they let on. They really love this stuff, and they love these cliches, they love not going into detail with stuff. But they're not going to say it. They'll say a couple of socially relevant things about, oh, I'm with this minority, I'm with this minority, but it doesn't mean anything. It just feels like a very corrupt industry to me. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this rambling video, and I'll be back with a finale of what the hell is this. Bye for now.